In this week's Parsha Tavo, we read about the Bikkurim, and there's a fascinating discussion about Bikkurim that can help us appreciate one of the facets of what is so special about Eretz Yisrael. From where does one bring Bikkurim? So the Mishneh in Kelim says that one of the aspects of Kedusha's Eretz Yisrael, which makes it more kadosh than the rest of the world, is that we only bring Bikkurim from Eretz Yisrael. From which part of Eretz Yisrael do we bring Bikkurim? Rabbi Yossi HaGlili says in the Mishnah of Bikkurim that we do not bring Bikkurim from Ever HaYarden because it's not called the Eretz Zavas Chabudvash. We only bring from the west side of the Yarden because that is the Eretz Zavas Chabudvash that is described in this week's Parsha. However, the Tanakama there disagrees. The Rambam in Perishah Mishneh, there in Bikkurim, says that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, rather like the Tanakama. Therefore, we would expect that the Rambam Mishnah Torah would paskin that we bring Bikkurim from Eretz Yisrael, including Ever HaYarden, including the east side of the Jordan River. However, the Rambam Hilchos Bikkurim, Perek Beis, Halacha Aleph, paskins that we only bring Bikkurim mid Oraisa from the west side of the Yarden, and from the east side of the Yarden, from Eretz, Sichon, Ve'og, Bikkurim is only a chiyuv mid Derabbanan. Because the Mishnah there explains in the name of the Maharik that the Rambam learns the machlokas between Tanakama. Rabbi Yossi HaGlili is only machlokas mid Derabbanan, but really mid Oraisa, everybody agrees that Bikkurim are not brought from the east side of the Jordan River. And the question is why not? However, the Rambam holds in few places, including when it comes to Egla Rufa and Smicha, that the Shem Eretz Yisrael, the borders of Eretz Yisrael for various non-agricultural mitzvos, are broad and include the entire area conquered by the Oli Mitzrayim, the entire area conquered from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua ben Nun up through David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech. That entire area was given the title of Shem Eretz Yisrael, was given the title of the borders of Eretz Yisrael, and the halachos of Eretz Yisrael that are not agricultural in nature, not the halachos of Chumos and Maisros, but rather things like Egla Rufa, things like Smicha, they apply in the broader area of Eretz Yisrael. So, Bikkurim, even though Bikkurim grow out of the ground, but it's not a mitzvah tefillah ba'aretz, as Tosa says in Bava Basra, it's not a mitzvah tefillah ba'aretz, it's rather a halacha that one brings produce to the Beis HaMikdash. Why would the Rambam paskin that it does not apply in Ever HaYarden? We would expect that if the broader non-agricultural borders of Eretz Yisrael include Ever HaYarden, we would expect that Bikkurim should be brought even from Ever HaYarden. So why does the Rambam learn the Mishnah Bikkurim such that all Tanaim agree that we don't meet the rights that bring Bikkurim from Ever HaYarden? So it could be that the Rambam learns from the Mishneh Kelim that we referenced before, which says that Bikkurim, together with Omer Shtei Halechem, are only brought from Eretz Yisrael, and that's an expression of what makes Eretz Yisrael kadosh compared to the rest of the world. Perhaps the Rambam learned from that Mishnah something crucial about what makes Eretz Yisrael so special. Until now, we've mentioned that there is a Kedusha to the ground of Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha's karka of Eretz Yisrael, that makes Eretz Yisrael kadosh for Chumos and Maisros and mitzvos atuos ba'aretz. We've mentioned that Eretz Yisrael has a Shem Eretz Yisrael, it's a national political entity that is important for mitzvos like Egla Rufa and Smicha. But there's a third aspect. That Mishnah in Kelim is actually part of a set of Mishnayos, which is describing the concentric circles of Kedusha that emanate out from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Mishnayos in Kelim go through 10 levels of Kedusha that, starting from Eretz Yisrael, going inward to Yerushalayim, and within Yerushalayim to the Har HaBayis, and within the Har HaBayis, the different levels of Kedusha, as one goes further and further and closer to the Makom of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Makom of the Kodesh HaKadoshim is the center point of what the Rambam calls elsewhere the Shechina. The Kedushas HaShechina in this world is centered in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That Kedushas HaShechina emanates outward in levels with levels of Kula. As you go out from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it goes out in levels to the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Beyond the borders of Eretz Yisrael, there are no more halachos that depend on Kedushas HaShechina. But there are 3 halachos listed in that Mishnah in Kelim that are expressions of the Kedushas HaShechina, which is Shora in Eretz Yisrael. That Kedushas HaShechina is what governs the halachos of Omer, Shtei Halechem, and Bikkurim. The Omer and Shtei Halechem can only be brought from grain that grew in the land of Eretz Yisrael which is Kadosh B'Kedushas HaShechina, and the Shtei Halech and the Bikkurim. The Bikkurim can only be brought from the part of Eretz Yisrael, which is Kadosh B'Kedushas HaShechina. And therefore, that could explain the Rambam, that the Rambam says Bikkurim, according to all the Tanaim, Bikkurim can only be brought from the land which has Kedushas HaShechina, and that Shechina, perhaps, the Rambam holds, as other Rishonim hold, like the Ramban and the Ran and others, hold that the Kedushas HaShechina is only on the west side of the Jordan River. What we learn from here, perhaps, something astounding, that first of all, that there are three elements of Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. There's Kedushas HaKarka, there's the Shem Eretz Yisrael, the national political sovereignty, and there is also Kedushas HaShechina, the place which is the outermost expression of the Shechina, which resides in the Mikdash, in the Kodesh Kadashim. But we also see from here something amazing about Bikkurim, because Omer and Shtei Halechem are national mitzvos. Omer and Shtei Halechem are one carbon brought on behalf of all Klal Yisrael. So the Kohanim who are Osik in Omer and Shtei Halechem, they have the opportunity to bring that carbon, and that carbon is something which you take a grain which grows in a place which is related to Kedushas HaShechina, a place which is, as it were, a recipient, if you will, of the Kedushas HaShechina, and brings it to Yerushalayim. But the Bikkurim is for all Klal Yisrael. This week's Parsha tells us that there's a carbon, a type of carbon, a Bikkurim, which is not exactly carbon, it's a hava. There's a type of hava, a type of offering that every single Jew could do. Every single Jew has the opportunity to take something and appreciate that this item is going in the place of the Shechina, and he wants to take that and bring it with him to the source of that Kedushas HaShechina, to the Beis HaMikdash, to bring it Lifnei Hashem. It's an astounding mitzvah, and one which helps us appreciate what a special place we have in Eretz Yisrael, and one that, B'ez Hashem, we all hope to be able to be Mekayim, B'Foal, B'Her V'Yameinu.